Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Clare Patrick. I am an independent writer, researcher, curator, and I think what I'm speaking to you tonight about is a recent residency that I did here in Paris. It was a 3-month-long research project, which actually has continued because I received additional funding, and I also started the project before beginning the residency, which began in April this year. So it was a sort of period of 3 months in like intensive residency mode, but really the project actually now is sort of about a year into it, and I think it will continue to evolve and develop. The residency was with an organization called Aware, which is based here in Paris. You may know of it. The name stands for Archives of Women Artists for Research and Exhibitions. And it was recently announced that they're going to be merging with the Centre Pompidou. So it's quite an exciting time for them. But I was very fortunate to be the Marie-Solanges Apollon researcher in residence for the duration of my program there. And really the residency was a call to reconsider the work of a figure from history, particularly thinking through ideas of the Black Atlantic. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the kind of idea of the Black Atlantic, but really it's thinking through what a writer named Paul Gilroy has termed the Black Atlantic, which speaks to sort of transatlantic roots of Black migration throughout history. So Adrienne Fidelin was a dancer and a performer and a model, and predominantly her memory or how she is remembered is through her affiliations with Man Ray, who was a photographer. Unfortunately, even that is quite minimal. And so really that was the majority of my research, was thinking through why is it that she's not as recognized or as remembered? Why is she not spoken about? Why has so much been written about other people that Man Ray was sort of circulating with and friends with? And what does it mean that she wasn't remembered? I think there's a lot of sort of easy lines that you can draw, she was a woman of color from one of the French colonies, so there's already kind of inbuilt biases. But I think there's potentially other things. And I don't have all the answers. I definitely was not able to find enough to conclude anything very extensive after 3 months of intensive research. But I think what was interesting was really the dialogues and the conversations that we were able to have, that I was able to have with people here in Paris. I'll move on to the next slide because I know it's boring to look at one slide forever and ever. But I wanted to start with this one because this is her handwriting, and really a lot of, again, what is known of her and what is seen of her is are photographs of her taken by Man Ray and also taken by Lee Miller and a couple of other photographers of those sort of friendship groups. But I think it's really lovely to see her handwriting, to see an impression of her of some kind, some sort of self-representation, and that's really what I tried to kind of center in my work. So it says, I leave a kiss for you here, which I just think is sweet. But really I'm thinking through what it is to travel, to seek, to revel, and to remain. So she left Guadeloupe in the late 1920s, arriving in Paris as a teenager. She left because of a massive hurricane that occurred in her hometown of Guadeloupe, on the island of Guadeloupe, and joined some family that was already in Paris. And she stayed in Paris for the rest of her life. So she didn't try and go back. I don't have too much information on what kept her here or kept her from going back, besides sort of the bits of life story that I do know. But she remained in Paris when Man Ray escaped or fled because of the Second World War. So again, I have questions. Why did she stay? A lot of people would say she stayed because she had family here and she didn't want to leave them. Yes, that may be true. Man Ray was traveling to America. What was America like in terms of receiving women of color, foreigners at the time? I think that's a bigger question to answer. And so here she is. I also want to say that I'm not the first person to do this research. There are some incredible other scholars who are also currently doing this research, and so just to name them and to acknowledge them as well as Sala Peterson and Wendy Grossman are sort of two sort of foremost scholars, and it's really through their work that I was able to kind of even know where to look and know where to start looking. But this is a photograph that she attached to a letter that she sent to Man Ray. So during the 1930s and 40s, Man Ray had left Paris, and they were exchanging letters to try and kind of maintain contact despite the war. That didn't last very long because he quickly moved on, moved around a lot while he was in the US, and then he also moved on with someone else. But again, I think to start with an image of her choosing, I think was something I was quite excited and encouraged to find. And again, just more handwriting. This is a letter that is in the Fonds Man Ray at the Bibliothèque Kandinsky, and it's the paper is so thin it's see-through, and it's overwritten on both sides. So it's sort of, I was thinking through what it is to have these sort of traces of someone, and what it is to do that research, and how to kind of build a story or think of the structures of what it might be to do this research. And really I was thinking through hands and traces and marks, and then also the writing of Edward Glissant, who speaks about opacity and the right to opacity. So just to give a little bit of a sense of the period, she was a dancer at a place called the Bal Blomet, which is still around. It's in Montparnasse, so opposite side of where we are now, but it was really a hub of dancing, of jazz, of kind of creative expression, and it was a real hub for the Surrealist group to kind of come together and to exchange and to meet. And it's sort of understood that that is likely where Man Ray and Adrienne would have come into contact and would have started to engage together. And I think, again, I think more can be done to really unpack what that scene was. And partly why I think this research is really interesting and quite critical is that so much of the narrative around the Surrealist artists and the Surrealist thinkers and that whole movement is that their encounter with kind of Caribbean life and Caribbean traditions was really only when they themselves went on a boat to Martinique. André Breton and the likes sort of left France because of the war, and it was only once they arrived there then that they would sort of suddenly discover the Caribbean. And I just think that's, you know, a little bit too simple, because they were engaging with people here, they were dancing, they were singing, they were performing. And I think that's, again, part of the fact that Adrienne Fidelin has been written out of these histories is, again, to erase that earlier encounter or that earlier exchange of ideas. I'm not sure how grainy these images are on the big projection, but what I found interesting here was just that this is at the same place. The way it's recorded in the archive is that the photograph of Adrienne Fidelin is sometime between 1937 and 1938, and the portrait of the self-portrait of Man Ray is sort of definitively noted as 1937. I'm pretty sure this was taken on the same day, and I'm pretty sure that Adrienne Fidelin would have taken the photograph of Man Ray. So again, I just find it interesting that the images could have sort of titled self-portrait, whereas the portrait of Adrienne is sort of, you know, that's not suddenly titled a self-portrait because Man Ray took it, or, you know, just questions really. This is a video of Adrienne in Man Ray's studio. She's naked from the waist up, but so is he. You can barely see her because he kind of keeps walking in front of him. And yeah, this was one of the first times that I actually saw any kind of footage of her. She was a dancer and a performer, and she regularly performed at like the Theatre des Champs-Élysées and the Bal Blâmé, but I haven't been able to really find too many clips of her physically performing, of her moving, and I think that that's significant. And again, I think it's interesting that Man Ray is just in the way all the time. I keep kind of wanting to like, can you move? I'm trying to see Adrienne. And then, yeah, this is a letter that she had sent, which is currently at the Getty Research Institute. And these are ateliers of Man Ray that this one is the atelier that he moved back to. He came back to Paris after the war, and they continued to kind of be friends up until the mid-1960s. But yeah, they had both moved on by then with new partners. But there is a plaque that that acknowledges that she lived with him at another apartment, also in Montparnasse. And really, I include these images because part of what was possible with this residency that I did was really situating myself in the city and kind of tracing their footsteps. As romantic as that sounds, as sort of cliche as that is, it really helped me kind of solidify or kind of understand how close everything was. That group of friends, Paul Gilroy, Lee Miller, André Breton, Man Ray, Gertrude Stein, all of the kind of known people who hung out in Montparnasse, they really lived in very close proximity to each other. So it really just seems impossible to me that they weren't all hanging out with Adrienne as well. If she was with Man Ray, I'm pretty sure she was with all of them too. And yet she's almost nowhere in any of those biographies or memoirs. This is a sort of town suburb, Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which is to the far west of Paris, and they had a kind of a home there, which I haven't been able to find an address for, but there is a kind of note in one of the letters between the two of them where Man Ray asks after this house of theirs, and specifically I'm interested in the fact that he says, and our house, our small house, like how is everything? Because again, in all of his biographies, it's, oh, he had a house in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, and there's nothing about her having the house with him or sharing that home with him, or that they were crafting a life together. Again, another kind of example of incorrect or sort of lack of care, I suppose, in the archives is that there was a kind of incorrectly credited document. It's the letter on the far your right, which is a letter from Paul Gilroy to Adrienne Fidelin. And again, just in the record in the archives, there's her name has been misspelled. So that raises the question: how many other times has that happened? How many other examples are there of record of her that is just difficult to find? The photograph, the kind of film clip is Paul Gilroy, who was a writer and artist, part of the Surrealist group, holding Adrienne. And then this is a kind of just funfair style image, Man Ray and Adrienne Gilroy and Noosh Gilroy, his wife. And they were really, from what I can tell, a real kind of close group of friends. This was a collaborative project which Paul Gilroy and Man Ray did together. It's called the Free Hands. But Adrienne is really throughout this book, this kind of collaborative publication, and I haven't really seen too much analysis of it. So I think that's, again, 3 months was not enough time to really get into anything, but these were sort of starting seeds, which I'm excited to pursue further. And again, the theme of hands, this I'm pretty sure is Adrienne. I don't know for sure, but I'm fairly sure that this is her. And so there is a real preoccupation with hands in general. And with movement and yeah. Yeah, I think I'll keep going just in the interest of time, but I was interested in the kind of, I don't know if you can see, but here it says Adi, it's just the wrong way around. Again, also, Adrienne is often referred to as Adi or Ad, and it's spelled differently in numerous places. And so, yeah, how she referred to herself typically was Adi or Adrienne. And then Man Ray and Adi kind of like joined their names together at one point in like a kind of joke. But I was interested in how he treated the writing of her name there in contrast to how he kind of writes his name into the sketch, which is this piece called Dark Fiction. So following my residency at Aware, I was awarded funding from the Tate and the Andrew Mellon Foundation in the UK to do continued research. And this means that I have the opportunity to really look into the archives in the UK that potentially have some clues and some further ideas of who she was and what she was up to. So this piece is at the V&A, and I was able to go and have a look at the print in their collection, sort of get a little bit more of a sense of close-up images. This is actually one of the first times I encountered her. This is a photograph that was featured on an exhibition in New York last year called the Harlem Renaissance at the Met. And actually I saw that show when I was on another residency, which was a curatorial fellowship based in New Haven. And so it's also just been interesting for me to trace my own migrations and my own travels, thinking through what it is to move regularly and what that does to creative processes and to record keeping and memory making, and to think of that in relation to Adrienne's story. But again, I saw this photograph and it is just that stark realization that all of these other names, at least to me, Lee Miller, Nuja Elawad, Leonora Carrington, were very familiar, and they even call her Adie Fidelin in this label. I hadn't heard of her, and I hadn't kind of encountered her story, and so I was wondering why. I typically call her Adrienne, just I think that's a bit more respectful. This is again one of the famous photographs taken by Roland Penrose, taken by Lee Miller. Roland Penrose is in the photograph, and I was able to look at one of the prints of this image that was produced in 2010 as a kind of celebratory anniversary print at the V&A again. And I really liked being able, you can't see it too well here, but I really liked being able to sort of see the cork from a wine bottle in the grass, which wasn't something I'd really been able to kind of fully see in a digital image. So just to speak to the importance of really being able to look at things in physical form to the scale that they were intended to be printed at. If anybody's seen the Lee Miller film that came out, I think last year, this scene is recreated, and again, Adrienne Fidelin's in the image, but she's not in, she pops up I think twice or three times in the movie. I think she has like one or two lines, but I don't think she's named at all in the movie from what I can remember. But these, so these images are really also the lasting kind of memory of, or like when people think of her, they often sort of think of the fact that she was on holiday with all of them. And the way that narrative is crafted is that it was sort of a once-off holiday, when in fact it was sort of repeated summer holidays over 3 or 4 years. And so, yeah, and the surrealists themselves, which takes me to this bit, often speak to how impactful those summer holidays were on their creative processes and the kind of real depth of exchange and interaction that was happening with the group and within the group, and sharing of ideas and sharing of influences and inspirations. and discussion. So again, it feels oversimplified or unfair to limit any kind of acknowledgement of her presence in those spaces to sort of a brief encounter when it was repeated consecutive summer holidays. So Eileen Agar, this is again speaking to the research that I'm now able to do in the UK. Eileen Agar was a Argentinian-born surrealist artist who was based in the UK and lived most of her life there, and she has extensive archives at the Tate Britain, and she writes about Adrienne Fidelin in her memoir, autobiography. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think so. This is on the handwritten page is one of the first drafts, and then there's a typescript, and there's like probably like 6 different printed copies of like different versions of the book in the archive as she's working on it. And I was really interested to see the difference in how, from the first handwritten notes to the final printed book, even just this one tiny little anecdote about Adrienne Fidelin changes. The tone of how she's kind of recrafting that narrative changes. It's not so significant, you know, it's not like, oh, suddenly I've cracked the code, but there is a kind of editing and reconsidering of what it is that Eileen Agar is trying to say about Adrienne. So in the first handwritten note, it's sort of a story about how she was feeling quite bad. Eileen was feeling quite bad because she'd overexposed the images of Adrienne, that they were on this holiday in the south of France and she was taking photographs of everybody, and she took some photographs of Adrienne and they were overexposed because she didn't kind of set her camera right. And then she talks about another sort of story where Man Ray and Picasso were sort of teasing her about the cuisine in Guadeloupe and what people were eating, and that Adrienne got upset. And then there's a story about how Eileen Agar took Adrienne for lunch. But in the final book, it really reads like Adrienne was upset that the photographs were overexposed, and therefore to kind of compensate, she was taken out for lunch. Again, it's so hard to know, like, if the editing is kind of to recraft for clarity or to recraft to create a certain idea of who she was. And I think that's really the saddest part for me, is that it's so difficult to know what the real story is and who she was and what her voice was. There is some of her voice in the letters that I've read, and they're wonderful to encounter. Her family also is in part, you know, they're around to some degree, but she didn't have children as far as I know. And so there hasn't been a kind of consistent memory keeping in any kind of public way. And again, I just have questions. I don't want to sort of decide anything one way or another, but I think these questions are interested in thinking through, again, what it is to be moving, what it is to be migrating, what it is to kind of be situated in contexts that are not always friendly, that are not always, you know, the easiest to navigate as an outsider or as someone who maybe shouldn't be an outsider but is treated as such. And so then that really kind of brings me to where I'm at now, which is to think through, and which has always been my idea, was to think through this research as a historical project that can be transformed and brought into the present through artists working today and through the spaces that we're all engaging with today. So this was literally just walking along the river a couple of weeks ago, and it's just amazing. Like, I don't know, to me this feels like a real privilege to encounter. There's lots of dancing and performing where I'm from, but to kind of encounter it in this kind of public way, in a kind of shared communal space where everyone's just gathering and enjoying it, is really interesting to me. It's a free space, but it's also not a kind of, it's not necessarily like an idealized space. It's a shared space that everyone's engaging with. So that really is how I'm thinking about exhibition making moving forward. And so, yeah, really, I'm excited to be working with a couple of artists based in Paris, kind of getting to know more artists from Guadeloupe specifically, some based there, some with kind of Caribbean heritage, and to really think through what it is to, be engaging with histories that aren't necessarily clear or necessarily readily available, and why that might be. So one last example is the work of Stephanie Jemison, and she's got an exhibition that's just opened at Lafayette Anticipation. So I still need to go see that, but if you haven't seen it, I think it should be a good one. This is a piece called Scaffolding, and it really is interesting. Also, the previous slide, A Rock, a River, a Street, is the title of a novel that Stephanie Jemison wrote, which is also a very interesting piece that really thinks through kind of interiority and encountering the outside world, which I think speaks to some of my ideas around Adrienne Fidelin. And this piece is a work that was, I think it's in the Met collection, and it's a video work that is looking at instances of spontaneous human pyramids, which Jemison was kind of encountering through a research project that she was doing. And so it's a video piece, but also kind of forms into public programming that is done and performances that are done when the work is shown. And so, yeah, that's really... That's my presentation, I think. I would love to answer questions if anyone has questions. I can also speak more on just doing residencies in general, and I really do think that that's an important thing to be able to do, and I'm very grateful to do that. Okay, I'm seeing lots of nods, so I'll maybe just, I come from an art background. I studied fine art as an undergrad, and I did a master's in art history in the UK. After that, I did a residency here in Paris. It was a really short residency for 2 weeks as a kind of research immersive group program. And that really catalyzed a kind of frame of reference for me, which I'd never had, of what it is to just exist with other artists. And I think when I did my undergrad, it was in Cape Town. It was at a very particular moment in South African history. It's 10 years ago now, which is really, really scary. But there were these sort of big protest actions and a movement called Fees Must Fall, which I was a part of, which was incredibly formative to how I think about the work that I want to do in the world as well, and this sort of way I encounter storytelling. But yeah, studying art in South Africa, being involved in art in South Africa is its own very particular thing. And so to be on a residency in Paris completely out of that context, in a completely new environment, and this particular residency that I did was with international artists. So I met an artist from Ecuador, I met an artist from Chile, I met artists from the UK, from the US, and it was hugely impactful to just have conversations. We did a whole lot of different programming, but really what was so lasting for me was the relationships that we formed as a group, and to kind of get to know what it was to be an artist from their perspective, from their own context as well. I then have not pursued art at all, and I really kind of committed to research, and I really do find the kind of interest in writing and research and thinking through ideas and collaborating with artists to realize their ideas and to support their creative processes through exhibition making. I find that to be much more rewarding and much more what I'm sort of driven to do. And that has also been formed, those kind of convictions have also been formed through the residencies that I've done. So I also then did a solo residency in Ireland for about 6 weeks. And that was, again, very interesting because it was also sort of me trying to muddle through whether I was trying to make my own work or do research. And yeah, and then I did a year-long residency or fellowship in New Haven, which was wonderful, which was a curatorial residency. And that was a chance to sort of, to commit or to kind of really think through what it is to do curatorial work. I think in the art world, it's often very much in between things. You kind of find ways to pull things together with not very much, or you end up being very lucky to work in an institution or a gallery, but then sometimes it's not only your ideas that come into the exhibitions, it's kind of what makes sense for the bigger picture, which is also an amazing process. But this curatorial fellowship specifically felt like an opportunity to really refine or really think through what my own kind of convictions and interests are.